Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and tonight I'll be reviewing for you The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Switch 2 Edition. As most of you know, I literally just put out a review for the Switch 2 edition of Breath of the Wild like a week and a half ago. And seeing as these games are very iterative of each other, as in they share the same world, the same engine, most of the same mechanics, most of the new features that applied to that game also apply to this, so this may be a bit of a shorter review than usual. However, to make things a bit more interesting, I thought I'd share how I feel going back to Tears of the Kingdom right after playing Breath of the Wild, both on the Switch 2, as well as trying out amiibos for the first time, because surprisingly I didn't do that in the original Tears of the Kingdom. Now, there is one thing that is specific to the Switch 2 version of Tears of the Kingdom that does make this a little more interesting on the Zelda notes front, and that's that in addition to all of the features that it offered in Breath of the Wild, you can also share your vehicle creations with other players. Now, did I test any of the Zelda notes features in this version? Absolutely not. I had such a miserable time with it in Breath of the Wild, and I figured, you know what, Tears of the Kingdom is my favorite game. I really do not want it to be ruined by something that was kind of tacked on, so I decided to just ignore it. Maybe you can say that that disqualifies me as a reviewer, but I think that in the future, if Nintendo wants to make better versions of the games, leave smartphones out of it. You're dealing with two completely different operating systems that don't really mesh too well together. As far as amiibos, I have the Zelda and Loftwing amiibo. I used to have much more, but unfortunately I had to sell most of them due to a financial crisis. So when I tried this, I was pleased to report that the game actually registered it as a Zelda series amiibo. When I scanned it in the Switch 2 edition of Breath of the Wild, Nintendo didn't bother updating the game saying, oh hey, there have been new Zelda series amiibos since Breath of the Wild came out, but apparently Tears of the Kingdom did. You'd think they'd both get it right since they're both Switch 2 editions and they both came out on the same day. But anyway, I was able to get a special fabric designed after the sailcloth in Skyward Sword because that was a Skyward Sword based amiibo. It also caused a bunch of random plants to drop from the sky, and every other time besides the fabric, I would get a treasure chest that would have a rare material, usually a gemstone that I could sell for a high price. That's about it as far as the changes. Again, you can watch my Breath of the Wild review if you want a full and detailed analysis, but the short version, if you don't feel like doing homework, is the game runs and looks significantly better. It's not completely revamped as far as the graphics. It's still the same art style, but now you can see everything a lot more clearly. The colors are a lot more vibrant. There's no slowdowns. And one thing that really surprised me is that the loading screens were actually faster than the ones found in the Switch 2 edition of Breath of the Wild, which really shocked me because Tears of the Kingdom's world is significantly bigger than Breath of the Wild's, and because that game released on the Switch exclusively, whereas Breath of the Wild was a Switch and Wii U cross-launch, you would think that Tears of the Kingdom being the bigger game and also being made for newer hardware would load slower, but I think my personal conspiracy theory is that since Breath of the Wild was based on the Wii U version, which was a disc-based game, the loading screens were therefore longer by default because they couldn't do much with the disc-based format, whereas Tears of the Kingdom was designed with a cartridge in mind from the get-go, and so transferring from cartridge to cartridge didn't really require as much tinkering. But either way, I'm glad that I barely even had time to register the tips on the loading screens before I was right back into the action. Even just loading into the overworld hardly took any time at all, which I was really amazed by. As far as how I feel about Tears of the Kingdom, going back to it, I do think that this is the superior game. It is still my favorite video game, and for those of you wanting a short answer that's not gonna devolve into a 3-hour essay like most people do, I love the thrill of actually moving around and exploring the world. It feels like exploration not only is a reward in and of itself, because the game world looks so stylistic and gorgeous, but that you're constantly making progress toward your end goal, which is to defeat Ganondorf. And even when the game is doing stuff that's less than desirable. Like, I know a lot of people have complained that the depths don't have enough variety and the sky islands don't have enough variety, and I absolutely agree. I do think that there could have been more work done to differentiate the various parts of those areas, but at the same time, you still feel like you're making progress. Because in the depths, whenever you find a light route, it is directly below a shrine in the overworld, and vice versa. So you can use those as a means of finding the other one that's adjacent. And so you feel like you're making progress in the above layer just by wandering around, and as you use the bright bloom seeds to light up the depths, you feel like you're getting a better understanding of the layout. And a lot of times the layout itself mirrors that of whatever is above you, which can be very interesting to be like, oh wow, so that's a depth version of a river. That is honestly kind of cool. Like, even to this day, it amazes me that all of this ran on the Switch, and the game only had very minimal frame drops, and you had no loading screens jumping from one layer to the next. Absolutely mind-blowing. The Sky Islands, I think, fare a little bit better because they're not all exactly the same, but even the ones that repeat themselves still give you valuable resources that are hard, if not impossible, to find anywhere else, especially those Sundelion flowers. Like, those really help once you get toward the end game. And so, yes, maybe the scenery repeats itself, but I don't think most people are going to complain that the resources repeat themselves. And I also just love the novelty of being high up in the sky and being able to see even more of Hyrule. And now that you're on the Switch too, you can see even more. And then dive from the sky, and then watch as the landscape changes colors. You go past the clouds, and then glide over to a nearby shrine, all without a loading screen. It's absolutely phenomenal. It feels great, controls great. Tears of the Kingdom has some really good music, too. Like, yes, most of it is ambient, and a lot of it is borrowed from Breath of the Wild. But the new tunes, when the game decides it actually wants to have music, are absolutely jaw-dropping. Like, the orchestration in this game at times actually rivals what they did in Skyward Sword, which is saying a lot. I also love how the regional phenomena feel more threatening, both to the player and to the NPCs. Like, in Breath of the Wild, you'd go to an area and they'd say, oh no, we're in big trouble, but you wouldn't see anything different. Whereas in Tears of the Kingdom, the player would actually be inhibited by tangible things happening. Again, I don't want to give spoilers, but you're hindered by the problem. And by fixing it, you go back to that environment and see how it's reverted back to how it was in Breath of the Wild, and then you're like, oh good, traversal is better, the NPCs are happier, and the bosses are amazing. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of Tears of the Kingdom story, I ended up skipping most of it this time around. I do think that Matt Mercer as Ganondorf was by far the best casting decision, and he kills every single line he delivers. I also think the voice acting is slightly better than it was in Breath of the Wild, even if the sound mixing is still quite awful. Even performances that probably would have been considered passable in any other game are drowned out by the music being way too loud. So I'm wondering if maybe people are giving the actors flack for something that's more so an issue of sound mixing. Do I think Tears of the Kingdom is perfect? Heck no. And this Switch 2 version really hardly does anything to actually fix its problems. Like, if there was something you didn't like about Tears of the Kingdom, chances are it's still going to be an annoyance here. There's a couple of tweaks, like the frame rate being faster is probably going to be great for frame rate sticklers. The extra save file is great for capturing footage when you don't want to start up a whole nother profile. And I think the added frame rate probably would also help the various vehicles that people make to run even more smoothly and not cause the world to chug like crazy. Now, Tears of the Kingdom is normally $70, and it costs about $10 to upgrade this. So that means that you'll have to pay $75 if you want the full experience, which, mind you, Breath of the Wild originally cost $60, but then it had DLC, whereas Tears of the Kingdom did not. So technically, if you're a completionist, you'd have to pay more for Breath of the Wild if you wanted the full experience. But one thing that I really appreciate about Tears of the Kingdom that I don't see enough people talking about is that when it came to transferring data, because the Switch 2 is backwards compatible with Switch 1 games, it was easy enough to transfer all of my data over because I already had it on the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 is backwards compatible, whereas in Breath of the Wild, I had it on the Wii U, and I bought all the DLC on the Wii U, and I had to start completely over and couldn't even try out the DLC on the Switch 2. So that is a nice unintentional little bonus if you already have the game. So just to reiterate, if you already have the Switch 1 version of Breath of the Wild, you can just pay $10 or get it for free if you have the Switch Online expansion pack to upgrade. You don't need to buy the game again. But if you do buy the Switch 2 edition, it does come with the upgrade already included, but you can also put it into a Switch 1 and it'll just play the Switch 1 version of the game. So Switch 1 users don't have to feel left out. Personally, I can't get enough of Tears of the Kingdom. This is my 4th time replaying it, and of course this was the best because it ran so much smoother and looked so amazing. But I still think that Tears of the Kingdom is a phenomenal game no matter how you play it. The Switch 2 version just made it even more phenomenal. Just try not to get too caught up on the new content in the Zelda notes, and I think you are in for an absolute blast. Unfortunately, because this is more or less DLC, I am not going to include it as my game of the year, but if it's still my favorite game by the end of the year, I may very well give it an honorable mention, as this is the best Switch 2 experience of the year. We will see if No Sleep for Kaname Date ends up having as good of a story as the previous games in the Somnium Files series did. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Hope this video answered some of your questions. Sorry if it was too short, but I just didn't want to repeat myself too much for my Breath of the Wild review. So that will be linked in the end card at the end of this video if you want to refer to that for all of the changes made. I hope that you end up loving this game as much as I do, and please let me know in the comments what your unpopular opinions are in Zelda. I would absolutely love to start a discussion. So with that, you all have a wonderful day, and until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!